You're listening to the Downeast Mike podcast, the quirky little podcast from Maine. And now, your host, Downeast Mike.
Good morning, everybody. This is Downeast Mike of the world-famous Downeast Mike podcast, coming to you live from Downeast Maine. I hope you're having a good morning or a good day wherever you are. This is Downeast Mike, episode number 123, news and commentary for Thursday, May 16th, 2024. Our motto here is some of this is whimsy, some of it's true, and the interpretation of it all is entirely up to you. It's free choice here on the Downeast Mike podcast. We are officially listed as comedy, and that's far from our intention to be funny. And we hope we never hit our mark there. Our intention is to look at the headlines of yesterday and see how they line up with everything that's going on today. And our episode today, we have the Army ordering nuclear cannon shells from 1973, lost in the fog. I think I had a little bit of a suffering succotash whistle there. Lost in the Fog, 1973. It's a good story. Potato Smuggling from 1893. And then our focus segment today, which is just extraordinary, is the Maine Fat Man Convention of 1870. That you don't want to miss. We saved it for the last. It's kind of long-winded, but man, what a story it is. Birthdays today, nobody submitted anything. We have a word of the day, unctuous. Unctuous is an adjective, UNCTUOUS, unctuous. And some synonyms of unctuous are having, revealing, or marked by a smug, ingratiating, and false earnestness or spirituality. Another synonym for unctuous is fatty or oily, a smooth and greasy in texture or appearance. And then another synonym would be plastic, a fine, unctuous clay. And you have unctuously as an adverb or unctuousness as a noun. And nowadays, this word normally has a negative connotation, but it originated as a term describing a positive act, that of healing. The word comes from the Latin verb unguere, to anoint, and it's a root that also gave rise to the words unguent, which is soothing or healing salve, and ointment. The oily nature of ointments may have led to the use of unctuous, to describe things marked by an artificial gloss of sentimentality. An unctuous individual may mean well, but the person's insincere effusiveness can leave an unwelcome residue, much like that of some ointments. So we would think of an unctuous individual as perhaps an insurance salesman or a podcaster. This day in 1973, the story was the Army was ordering nuclear shells for an atomic cannon. And did you know this? That the U.S. Army had a big gun that shot nuclear bullets, essentially? Unknown to Defense Secretary Elliot L. Richardson, the U.S. Army has ordered several thousand new nuclear shells for its large cannon in Europe. The cost of the Army's nuclear ammunition modernization program is being kept secret by the Pentagon, but congressional sources who've been briefed on the plan says it'll run into the millions of dollars. As explained by an Army spokesman, the purpose of the program is to reduce the atomic ammunition produced 10 or 15 years ago. This would be back in the 1960s. The ammunition for two of the Army's largest artillery pieces, which was the 155 millimeter howitzer and the 8-inch howitzer. Both can fire either conventional or nuclear projectiles. Did not know they had that. The exact size of the stockpile is secret, but congressional sources talk of several thousand shells. They owned several thousand nuclear shells for these guns in 1973. A little bit of history on that atomic cannon. We looked at that with the deployment in the 1950s of atomic weapons on both sides of the Cold War. All three branches of the U.S. military, Army, Navy, and Air Force, they sought to justify fielding nuclear weapons within their individual arsenals. At that time, it seemed like the thing to do. For the U.S. Army, prior to the refinement of tactical nuclear missiles, that meant developing an atomic artillery piece. This weapon was the M65 280 millimeter motorized heavy gun, also known as the atomic cannon. And they have a picture of it here. And they fired it in May 25th, 1953 at 8:30 a.m. I wonder why they picked that time of day to shoot their nuclear gun. As the 10th of a series of 11 nuclear test firings during Operation Upshot-Knothole. T-131 number 9 fired a W-9 15-kiloton warhead a distance of 7 miles. No more and no less. The device detonated at an altitude of 524 feet above the target in Area 5, known as the Frenchman Flat, of course, at the Nevada Proving Ground. And this was the only nuclear firing of the M65. They have a picture here taken from a movie frame recording that nuclear detonation. It does look like your typical mushroom cloud, albeit a little bit smaller than what we like to see for our nuclear clouds. All right, long story there from 1970. Let's talk about Sidney Bouvier. He was lost in the fog, and this is 1973. Sidney Bouvier remembers the night of August 19th, 1971 as the longest of his life. Lost in a quaddy fog, he rode out the seemingly endless hours of darkness in a 16-foot rowboat moored to a lobsterman's buoy somewhere off the Trescott coastline. Now, if you've ever seen a quaddy fog, it can get pretty thick and wet on the outside of your tent if you're sleeping along the shore there. Bouvier's most recent wrinkle-gathering expedition on Monday afternoon resulted in a near carbon copy of the 1971 drama. Here's a guy that can't stay out of trouble. Although the unpredictable Downeast sky remained clear, darkness overtook the 61-year-old Trescott boatman as he passed Haycock Harbor on his return home. Wary of the chop which had developed on the surface of the sea, he dragged his 14-foot aluminum boat ashore near a wooded section of the coastline and spent the night high and dry. Although chilly and hungry, Bouvier, accompanied by his dog, weathered the night and finally arrived at home about 11 a.m. Tuesday. The 1971 incident was far more difficult. Even after the long night at sea, which he later described to the Bangor Daily News as awfully black, the fog failed to lift, and the early morning hours found him painstakingly working his way from buoy to buoy in hopes of making a landfall. Finally, a rain squall caused the fog to lift momentarily, and he recalled the first incident. Sorry, we lost a line there. Finally, a rain squall caused the fog to lift momentarily, and he sighted the shoreline about 1 p.m. There we go. He recalled the first incident following his return from the second overnight venture Tuesday and confessed, "If I didn't think I'd make it that night." The Wilton native, who was then 59 years old, had been gathering periwinkles when the fog enveloped his frail craft as he casually fished the incoming tide on his return to Bailey's Mistake. There's a lot to take in here. The Trescott resident dug clams all winter, but due to a recent flooding of the market, he turned to the pennywinkling. He admitted that these too have a limited demand, but you've got to do something to keep going. I think they do worming today. It's all tough work. The U.S. Coast Guard at Jonesport was notified that Bouvier was overdue at 6:30 p.m. Monday, but shortly after a search effort was organized, and then he showed up in the harbor at Bailey's Mistake. In 1971, the Coast Guard, coastal wardens, and other concerned individuals took part in an intensive search which lasted most of the day. And although the harbor was dubbed Bouvier's Mistake by the Trescott Fishermen's Friends in 1971, Coast Guard officials at Jonesport complimented his excellent judgment in attaching his small boat to the buoy rather than rowing wildly in the fog or drifting with the tide. The decision to go ashore Monday night rather than chance the rough sea and darkness was believed to have been equally wise. The beautiful harbor near the Trescott-Lubec town line received its intriguing name over 140 years ago when a Captain Bailey grounded his foremaster on a ledge a short distance inside the bay. The Lubec-bound sailing vessel was 7 miles short of its destination when darkness, stormy seas, and pea-soup fog apparently led the captain to believe he was approaching Quoddy Roads off the port of Lubec. A wrong turn and the subsequent grounding surely caused Captain Bailey some apprehensive moments. He reportedly chose to abandon the vessel and take its cargo of lumber ashore, where the crew built homes and settled in the little community. Some equally apprehensive moments have been spent by a lonely boatman named Bouvier, whose encounters with fog and the darkness off Bailey's Mistake rival the adventures of the sea captain a century and a half ago. So recounting that same story. I have to wonder that with the captain with his cargo of lumber going ashore and the crew builds homes, I bet there's more than one community along the Maritimes and coastal Maine that a lot of the houses were built with lumber from shipwrecks and boats. We had a story here from 1973, quite interesting, about telephone service in Downeast Maine from Calais. If telephone owners in eastern Washington County have been experiencing some difficulties lately in getting their calls through the Calais traffic from the New England Telephone and Telegraph Company, they might be cheered up to know that some of those jammed line signals or other thorns in the side of the impatient may be cut down a bit after Saturday at midnight. They were going to switch some lines over. The Calais, Maine operators have been handling person-to-person credit card and other calls from 2 New Brunswick communities from as far back in history as anyone on either side of the border can remember. But due to what has been termed by New Brunswick telephone officials as a mutual agreement, the Canadians are going to handle their own calls from the 2 communities beginning Sunday. The Calais office will still continue to process calls from Campobello Island, Deer Island, and Grand Manan, which require the personal services of an operator at the border city. The 3 islands will have their calls handled by Canadian operators beginning at some undisclosed future date in the agreement. Isn't that interesting? They still had human operators punching the lines through back in 1973. Let's see. The next story was from 1897. On this day in 1897, just a little note that ice had left Green Lake. That's still ice there in the lake. Talking about a story in Hollowell, Maine. The people living in a building on Water Street in Hollowell, owned by Mrs. Kempton, you remember her, were much startled about 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon by the sudden settling of the house. It dropped 2 feet in the rear and continued settling. The river had undermined it. It was occupied below as a store and above by 2 families. The building was considerably shattered, but it can be righted up and repaired. And then they repeat that over and over again there in Hollowell. From this day in 1893, we had a fellow that was smuggling potatoes, Samuel J. Watson. He's a solid-appearing citizen of Holton, Maine. He is a fair type of the country trader, and the person who gazes upon his very respectable countenance, framed in his iron gray hair, feels a rather lively interest and discovering why he would be sitting in a prisoner's dock at the U.S. District Court, Portland, Maine. Mr. Watson's down here to answer to the charge of smuggling potatoes and other produce over the eastern Maine border. You know, you thought drugs and things like that coming over the border were a big deal. Back in this time, it was potatoes. He's accused of a long series of offenses, suspected and guessed at, and it was only lately through enough evidence was obtained to secure an indictment. The immediate cause of Mr. Watson's compulsory trip to Portland was the alleged attempt on his part to smuggle 500 bushels of potatoes into Maine through the entry port at Vanceboro. These potatoes were in freight cars, and the methods observed in this kind of smuggling will be explained below. Then they going on, he smuggled many $1,000s worth of goods and produce annually into Maine in the eastern and northern border. A potato smuggler, 1893. Scarlet fever in Bucksport, the Board of Health has caused the Grammar West Intermediate and Primary Schools to be closed on account of scarlet fever, which has appeared in the family of Jer Bridges, from which there is a child attending each school. Yeah, what was our word there? It is feared the disease will be spread in spite of all precautions. 4 more cases in 2 other families, Winthrop and Woodbridge, in the neighborhood of the Bridges family have come to light. Story out of Fryeburg, Maine, 1893. Mrs. P.A. Bradley and 3 other ladies of Fryeburg were on their way to church, and the horse stepped upon one of his forward shoes and fell. In his struggle to arise, he rolled over on his side. Timely aid was at hand, and no serious injury resulted. 1893, capturing the important moments of the world. Let's see, we have a story out of Unity. What appears to be very pure quality anthracite coal has recently been found on the Bennett Farm near Unity Village. I wonder if it's still there. Mr. R.T. Rankin of Belfast has arrived at Unity with a boat to be used on Unity Pond, and he's going to build a cottage there. A new butter factory is nearly completed and will be ready for business in a few days. Now, when they say factory, you picture a great big building or just somebody's kitchen type factory. Several carloads of lumber at the railroad station for the Unity Lake Land and Improvement Association. They're going to be used to build cottages at Windermere Park. Sounds like such an industrious time. There's considerable sickness at Unity, Maine. An epidemic resembling the grippe prevails. There's a rumor of an inroad of Dagos from Boston and has blown some excitement into the Biddeford quarrymen's strike. East Machias is now itching for electric lights, and they want a kindling wood factory. This story's a little wild. The Oxford Democrat reports snowdrifts 8 feet deep in the town of Greenwood. And further along that, there's plenty of frost in the ground yet, remarks a central Maine farmer whose habits of getting his work done early are somewhat interfered with by Old Sol's indifference. Looks like Maine was trying to imitate Dakota, where the frost stays in all summer. There'll be doubtless some balm in the atmosphere before the dog star shines on us. He can't be serious. A correspondent from the Oxford Democrat tells about one of his neighbors with 4 horses, a cow, and 14 sheep, who hasn't more than 100 pounds of hay in his barn and does not know where he can buy any within 10 miles. Others are in nearly as hard a place. The problem is it has been so cold that all kinds of stock have eaten the hay up to the present time with nearly the same relish as in the winter. I think it's time for our fat story. We're going to dedicate some time to this one, so you might want to refresh your coffee. So we'll start off with the essay from Dr. W.P. Shattuck about fat men. This is a real story, 1870. What makes men fat? A ready answer, perhaps, is given by saying that it's a large development of fat cells in the human system. No men are fat men without perfect digestion and nutritive powers. More, in fact, depends upon the nutritive system than the digestive function, for we sometimes see a man with good digestion but lean as a rail, and who daily consumes double the amount of food eaten by a man of nearly double his weight and his equal in activity. The fault in the lean man lies in nutritive functions, a larger portion of the food consumed being lost to the system. Some men will keep fleshy on a diet of fruits and vegetables. So vigorous are those powers of the system. It is stated that Lord Byron, at a time in his life, was so prone to take on flesh that he confined himself to a diet of vegetables, and such was his keenness of appetite that he would allow them to slightly sour before eating to check his relish for them. Fat men are usually good feeders. Complete digestion and nutrition are usually quickeners of the appetite and gives a relish, but it does not follow that all fat men are gourmands. Fat men are usually jolly, given to mirth and hilarity, and no exercise of the body so promotes an action of the vital organs as laughter. The abdominal and respiratory muscles are called strongly into action, the heart beats quicker, the blood circulates more rapidly, digestion is promoted, the peristaltic motion of the intestines increased, morbid matter is thrown to the surface, and insensible perspiration increased to copious sensible perspiration. Fat men are not necessarily slow men. Some, with regret it may be said, are exceedingly fast men, but sluggishness and stupidity are not of a necessity of fat men. This is just... Some 25 years ago, the writer, while residing in Trenton, New Jersey, was invited by, I can't quite read the name, Professor Souville in the military academy at Paris, to visit with him a cousin of the present Emperor of the French, Prince Murat, who then resided upon the Bonaparte estate at Bordentown. So Prince Murat was a man of exceeding obesity, and whose abdomen when sitting would extend to within 6 inches of his knees. He was nevertheless a man of active movement, and as was illustrated in a broadsword set to with the professor, witnessed by the writer, who at its conclusion congratulated the prince upon his wind, being but little blown from the violence of the exercise. With the grace and alertness of a dancing master, Murat stepped forward a few paces, gave a spring, and planted his foot upon the wall 3 inches higher than his head, with the remark, "Monsieur Doctor, you cannot tell by the plumage whether the bird can sing." Neither does it follow that fat men are fools. The would-be witty writer of the Waterville Mail to the contrary. I think you got to dig in at a fellow writer in one of the other local newspapers. And by the way, may it not be just possible that the writer referred to as a miserable dyspeptic, hence his malignant spleen, one who cannot laugh and who needs the hearty commiseration of all fat men. So let's get to our focus story, the Fat Man Convention in Auburn in 1870. Tons of heavy weights in the Auburn Hall, unctuous arrivals from all parts of the state. They talk about the story here. Swimming lustily along our streets and beating the much vexed air with puffy lungs have been today a host of noblemen with faces ruddy and intelligent, and paunches ponderous and bulky. They come obedient to the kindly summons today to Auburn Hall and the groaning tables of the DeWitt. The essay and the rhymes read before this gathering, as they all the Fat Men of Maine gathering here, the rhymes read before this gathering sufficiently discuss the fact that fat men, healthy men with healthy brains, and as much of the physiology of fatness and the topography of fat men, it is enough that the ancient mythology and all history respect and honor the human colossus. Giants figure largely in Greek mythology and poetry, and Hercules, the personification of human strength, was worshipped by the ancients as a god. In Scandinavian mythology, giants were multiplied enough to make a good convention, while to German legends they cheerily led their jollity. I can't quite read that one either. The Thor of Scandinavian mythology was as strong as Atlas, and a fat man supported the world as long as poetry gave him a foothold. A lot of wild writing here. Before travelers investigated remote countries, races of giants were believed to exist in certain countries. The Patagonians approach nearest the fictions of medieval ages. Most of the men are 6 feet high, and the women are unusually tall. Buffon admits a number of authenticated giants. One of these, 11 feet high, a German. Other giants were Bernhard Gilly of France, 10 feet tall, and Patrick O'Brien, the Irish giant, who died in 1806. He was 8 feet 7 inches high. His hand from the palm to the end of his middle finger measured 11 inches, and his shoe was 17 inches long. St. Crispin saved the mark. Giants generally make good husbands, for they are not usually fidgety or cross-grained. So let's get on to the fat gathering here in Auburn. The day opened superbly, one of the finest day of this long, they said fine winter, but it must have been spring. At an early hour, the streets assumed an unwontedly fat appearance. Men immense as Thor, filling up big sleighs and running over the vehicle sides, flitted through the streets, while here and there a 300-pounder, focus of all eyes, toddled heftily through the streets, followed by the smiles of the admiring crowd of lean and hungry miserables. Hundreds of teams from all parts of this and surrounding counties reached here at an early hour and sandwiched the too numerous lean men of the state with some magnificent specimens of obesity. Everybody was in the best of humor. Even the habitually bilious smiled and said it was after all a happy idea. Such was the general hilarity. There was added to the sunshine of the day the ruddy sunshine of plethoric faces. The blues were in eclipse. Let us all go into the hall. And in the Auburn Hall was packed full at 10 a.m. The galleries and anterooms were brightly full of ladies who showed their keen appreciation of the occasion by their numerous attendants, and their favor to fat men by winsome smiles. The front seats were occupied by the fat delegates, to the number of about 400 fat men of every degree, profession, and calling, every face bright with smiles. They said to each other, "We are bully good fellows." It was a scene of a lifetime and a rare pleasure to look in the face of these fat hosts and see how felicitous a thing it is to have some meat on one's bones. The handshakings and greetings preliminary to the organization were hearty. Old comrades who feasted before roaring wood fires a quarter-century ago, when it was merrier to live than now, met after long separations and faced each other admiringly, getting as near as one another as their abounding rotundity could admit. This is pretty wordy. It takes men of this kidney to act as well as talk about genuine and sensible hilarity. So they called a convention. The Fat Convention to order was called by the Honorable J.B. Ham, chairman of the Committee of Arrangements. And he said he'd been frequently asked for what this convention was called. It was for a definite object for social enjoyment, in plain English, to have some fun and to organize, if you please, a mutual admiration society and look each other over. Fat men are jolly, and we welcome you jollily. These two sister cities thrice welcome you. May your shadows never grow less. And he goes on with his opening statement. And then he also noted that Miss Sylvia Hardy of Wilton, the Maine giantess, would arrive here by 12:30 p.m. So the crowd increases. The ladies float over from the galleries into the main hall and grasp hands with the fat men, happy those there to see. And then they start talking about the actual sizes. In one corner of the hall stood a set of scales. on which heavyweight after heavyweight turned the beam 200 pounds and upwards. You had to be at least 200 pounds. One delegate weighed 225 pounds, the next 341. It was estimated that there were at least 100,000 pounds, 50 tons of fat men. From Augusta were 4 tons of bowels. Other cities and towns did quite as nobly. 200-pounders thought they were babies before their heftier competitors. The committee of arrangements flew around the hall and shed their grease liberally and heroically in the service of fat men. So they had a measuring machine at one corner of the hall, at which each tallest man presided until he found a taller one, who then succeeded him in that duty. For a long time the tallest man was Mr. Charles Emery of Lewiston, who was 6'5". But about noon, A.T. Jellison of Otisfield, 230 pounds, came forward and beat him by a quarter-inch in height. Enoch Knight of the editorial fraternity came near him at 6'3". So they didn't seem like they were all that tall. They're not talling. Mr. Littlefield of Auburn, who's the president of the society, came forward and accepted the position and said, "I've presided at some conventions of a different character from this, but I will try and serve you as well as I can." He weighed 287 pounds at 75 years of age. He's the heaviest man in Androscoggin County. He has weighed up to 17 pounds at different times in his life. The committee announced that they would proceed to weigh the fattest men and conduct the contest for the prize. It was agreed that the prize lay between Mr. Brackett of North Herman and Mr. Haven of Chelsea. These gentlemen were escorted from the rostrum, which trembled under their tread, amid uproars of applause, and the committee proceeded to their duty. The scales were Fairbanks, noted for their accuracy, courteously furnished for the occasion by Messrs. Owen and Little of this city. So long story short, the heaviest man was Mr. A.G. Haven of Chelsea. He's 19 years old. He weighed 354 without an overcoat or hat. And the next heaviest man was George Brackett of North Herman. He's 57 years old. He weighed 347 pounds. Both gentlemen were received with roars of applause. And then they had a contrast. They had a Lilliput, Mr. Aaron Nutting of Lisbon, who's a jeweler, and he weighed 92 pounds. He's 3 feet 2 inches high, born in Lisbon. It says his father was small before him, and he has a brother nearly as small as he is. Mr. C.O. Sullivan of Lewiston was next introduced. He's born in Ireland. He's 33 years of age, 4 foot 2 inches high, weighs 112 pounds. So they had the little men and the big men. Really, really interesting. They went down through all the different sizes of people. And I think today, if they had the Fat Man Convention in Auburn, the numbers would be quite different. I think that's our podcast for today. We ran a little bit long and apologize for that, but thanks for listening, and until next time, I hope you and your loved ones enjoy a day that's full of grace, love, and kindness. We'll see you. I'm back. Oh, and I feel strong. It's a beautiful day. What could go wrong? Ready to go. I can move mountains with my mind. I'm gonna make the most of my time. I'm strong and I'm ready to climb. I've been down, I've been up, I've been kicked and I got back up. Fought the good fight and win all the wars. I'm building on success and hungry for